The hallway outside Auditorium B at Hargrove Medical College smells like floor wax and old carpet and the particular nervous energy of 400 people who have been awake since before sunrise. I know this because I was one of them. I had driven 2 hours and 40 minutes in the dark to be there by 8:15 a.m., and I was standing near the water fountain on the East Corridor when a woman I had met exactly 3 times in my life walked toward me with a smile that was already finished before she opened her mouth. My name is Wren. I am 31 years old. And I want to tell you about the 6 years I spent working 12-hour night shifts so that my brother could become a doctor, and about the 40 minutes I sat quietly in a folding chair in that auditorium before I found out that he had not forgotten a single one of them. My brother's name is Kofi. Dr. Kofi Osei, as of May 16th of this year, 10:47 a.m., when the dean of Hargrove Medical College placed a hood over his shoulders and shook his hand on a stage I watched from the 7th row. He is 29 years old. He is the first person in our family to hold a professional degree of any kind. And when I say our family, I mean 3 generations back because I checked. Because it mattered to me to know the full weight of what was happening on that stage. But I am getting ahead of myself. The woman in the hallway was named Patricia Aiken. She was the mother of Kofi's fiancée, Diane, and she was 61 years old and dressed in the careful, coordinated way of someone who treats every public occasion as a soft performance. She was wearing a pale cream blazer over a silk blouse and low heels that still added 2 inches, and she smiled at me with the warmth of someone who has learned that warmth is an effective delivery mechanism for things that are not warm at all. She said, "Today is about him. Please don't make it about your sacrifices." She said it pleasantly. She said it quietly, in the busy hallway, so that the 3 or 4 people nearby might not quite catch it. She was not shouting. She was not being dramatic. She was simply establishing something, a boundary, she might have called it, though the word means something different to her than it does to me. And then she smiled once more, the smile that means the thing has been said, and she has already moved on, and she walked past me toward the auditorium doors. I stood at the water fountain for a moment. I nodded at no one in particular. I found my seat. I want to tell you something before I go further. Before I tell you what happened when Kofi walked to the podium, I want to ask you what the weather is like where you are right now. Not because it matters to the story. It doesn't, but because I find myself telling this particular story in a lot of different directions, and I always wonder about the rooms and the seasons and the times of day it lands in. Tell me if it is morning where you are, or if the light is the late kind. I am curious about you. I should start, as these things always do, earlier. Much earlier. At the beginning of a situation that took 6 years to complete, and that I am still, in some ways, in the middle of. My mother's name is Abina Osei. She was born in Kumasi, and came to this country when she was 23 years old with a nursing qualification that the state licensing board would not recognize without additional credentialing examinations she did not have the money to sit for in the first 3 years she was here. She cleaned houses. She worked the overnight shift at a packaging facility in the industrial corridor 6 miles from where we lived. She learned the credentialing process, passed the examination on her second attempt in March 2009, and spent the next 14 years working as a licensed practical nurse at a rehabilitation facility called Greenway Care, on a schedule that was never less than 40 hours a week and was frequently 60. She is the reason I work nights. She showed me that nights are available when days are occupied, and that, if you are not afraid of the hours between midnight and 6 in the morning, there are always more hours to fill. My father left when I was 9 years old, and Kofi was 7. I do not have a complicated relationship with this fact. He left, and the space he left behind was filled by my mother's discipline and by the particular intimacy that develops between children who understand, before they are old enough to name it, that their family is operating on reduced margin, and that everyone needs to be careful. Kofi was careful. He was also brilliant in the specific, observable way that makes teachers lean forward during parent conferences. His biology teacher at Whitfield Middle School, a woman named Mrs. Yaboa, same Ghanaian surname, no relation, a fact they discussed once and both found amusing, told my mother at a conference in October 2013 that Kofi had the kind of spatial and analytical mind that thrived in medicine, and that she should look into early science programs at the high school level. My mother came home from that conference and told me what Mrs. Yaboa had said. We were eating rice and stew at the kitchen table at 8:30 p.m. I was 16 years old. I said, "Then we'll figure out how." I finished high school and declined the 2 partial scholarships I had been offered because attending university would have meant reducing my working hours, and reducing my working hours at that time was not something the family budget could absorb. This is not a tragic fact. It is a logistical one. I understood the sequence. Kofi was the one with the specific gift in the specific direction, and gifts in specific directions are not infinite in any family. I could work. I could hold things together. I could be the person who stays home and makes sure the structure is sound while someone else walks towards something larger. I began working full-time at Meridian General Hospital in January 2017 in a non-clinical support role in the overnight patient transport and logistics department. The hourly rate was $19.40, with a night differential that brought my effective rate to $23.85 per hour. I worked 4 12-hour shifts per week, Sunday through Wednesday, midnight to noon. I slept afternoons. I made dinner on my evenings off. On the 3 days I did not work, I managed my mother's household scheduling, drove her to appointments when her car was unreliable, and spent approximately 6 hours per week on the administrative tasks related to Kofi's financial aid, the renewal applications, the scholarship searches, the appeals when award amounts changed. Kofi's undergraduate degree in biochemistry at Halton University cost $53,700 over 4 years. Scholarships and institutional aid covered $39,200. The remaining $14,500 came from 3 places: a small inheritance my mother had received from her own mother and had been protecting for years, a federal parent loan my mother took in her name in the spring of Kofi's sophomore year, and $6,200 that I transferred to a student account in 4 installments across his junior and senior years, in amounts of $1,850, $1,850, $1,350, and $1,150, because I transferred what I had when I had it rather than waiting until I had a round number. I have the transfer receipts. I keep them in a folder in the top drawer of my filing cabinet. Not because I expected anyone to dispute them, because they are real, and real things deserve to be documented. Medical school was a different order of magnitude. Hargrove Medical College's annual tuition and fees were $54,300 per year when Kofi enrolled in the fall of 2019. Over 4 years, with cost of living, that number approached $267,000 in total. Kofi covered the bulk of this through a combination of federal graduate loans, a merit scholarship from Hargrove that covered $18,400 per year, and a research stipend in his 3rd and 4th years that paid $1,640 per month. The scholarship had been competitive, 43 applicants for 8 awards, and he had won it on the strength of his undergraduate research record and a personal statement that I had read 4 drafts of and commented on, primarily to tell him when a sentence was doing too much work and when he was being modest about something he should name directly. My contribution to the medical school years was not financial, not primarily. It was something more diffuse and harder to put in a transfer receipt. It was the $340 I sent in February of his 2nd year when he mentioned, carefully, that his laptop had stopped holding a charge and he needed a replacement but was waiting until his next stipend payment. It was the 4-hour drive I made on a Sunday in October 2021 to bring him a home-cooked meal and sit with him for 3 hours while he processed a difficult rotation evaluation that had shaken his confidence in ways he did not know how to articulate over the phone. It was the reference letter I wrote for his residency application in September 2022, which his program coordinator later told him was the letter that had made the selection committee feel they understood who he was as a person rather than only as a candidate. I wrote that letter at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday, between my midnight shift intake duties, on a laptop I kept in my locker at the hospital. I want you to hold that image for a moment. Not for sympathy, just for accuracy. Kofi met Diane Aiken in the spring of his 3rd year of medical school, at a study group that became something else over the course of a month. Diane was a law student at Hargrove's affiliated graduate school, sharp and organized and genuinely kind in the ways that matter. She remembered what you told her. She followed through on small promises. She noticed when people were struggling before they announced it. I liked her from the first time we met, which was a dinner at a Thai restaurant in the medical district in August 2021, 3 months into their relationship. She was warm and direct and laughed in a way that was not performed. I thought, she is good for him, and she knows what she has. Her mother was a different experience. I met Patricia Aiken for the first time at Thanksgiving 2021 at a dinner hosted at the Aiken family home in the Westbrook neighborhood, a house with a professionally landscaped front yard and the kind of kitchen that suggests cooking is something performed rather than something needed. Patricia was gracious and organized and managed the evening with the quiet authority of a woman who has been running rooms for decades. She asked me polite questions. She expressed genuine warmth toward my mother. She said several thoughtful things about the importance of family and sacrifice. What she also did, I noticed, was manage the conversation about Kofi's future in a way that positioned his achievement as something he had arrived at through his own exceptional qualities. Full stop. His scholarship, his discipline, his intelligence. These things were real, and I would not diminish them. But when my mother mentioned, gently and without drama, that the family had worked together to support Kofi's path, Patricia nodded in the specific way of someone recording a sentence as background detail rather than something that changes the shape of the picture. I noted it. I said nothing. The second time I met Patricia was at Christmas 2022, also at the Aiken house. By this point, Kofi and Diane were engaged. The proposal had happened in November quietly at the apartment Kofi had shared with two classmates, with a ring that had belonged to my grandmother and that my mother had given him with both hands, and a long silence. At Christmas, Diane's family was warm and celebratory. Patricia asked me twice that evening what I did for work. Both times she received the answer. Overnight logistics coordinator, Meridian General, and both times she moved the conversation forward in a way that suggested the information had been processed and set aside. The third time was a dinner in March of this year at a restaurant near the medical school, organized ostensibly to celebrate Kofi's match result. He had matched at Lakeview University Hospital for his internal medicine residency, his first choice. It was a good evening. The food was excellent. Kofi was visibly happy in the way of someone who has been holding their breath for 4 years and has finally been given permission to exhale. At some point during that dinner, when Kofi was in the restroom and my mother was speaking with Diane across the table, Patricia turned to me and said, "We should talk sometime about the wedding logistics. I'd love your help with some of the coordination." I said that sounded lovely. I said I would be glad to help. She said, "Diane tells me you're very organized. It would be wonderful to have someone handle the vendor communication." I looked at her for a moment. Then I smiled. Then I said that sounded fine. Then Kofi came back from the restroom, and the conversation became something else. What I thought about, driving home, was the particular architecture of what she had done. She had not insulted me. She had simply assigned me a function, the organized one, the practical one, the one who handles vendor communication, and the assignment was made with complete sincerity, which almost made it worse. She had looked at my life and identified the part that was useful and had built a category around that part and placed me inside it neatly, and she had done this without malice because she genuinely did not understand that she was looking at a fraction of something much larger. I thought about a specific moment earlier in the dinner. Diane's father, a quiet and thoughtful man named Bernard, had asked me how long I had been working in hospital logistics. I told him nearly 7 years. He asked whether I had considered moving into hospital administration, and I said that I had taken some courses in health services management at the community level and was thinking about what came next, and he had nodded with the genuine interest of someone who takes competence seriously regardless of its origin. Patricia had been present for this exchange and had not engaged with it. She had been refilling her water glass, and then she had been straightening the edge of the tablecloth, and then the conversation had moved elsewhere. It was not that she was rude. It was that the information had simply not entered her. Kofi, for his part, had watched this happen from across the table. I had seen it in his face, that brief stillness, the careful way he continued his own conversation without reacting. He was not going to make a scene at his own match celebration dinner. He was going to remember. That is what Kofi does with things he cannot address in the moment. He folds them into himself very carefully and waits until the right room. I did not know, that night, what room he had already decided to use. I drove home from that dinner at 11:40 p.m., and I sat in my car in the parking lot of my apartment building for approximately 8 minutes. Something inside me loosened that had been tight for a long time. Not in relief, not in peace, but in the particular way a knot loosens when you finally accept that it is not going to untie cleanly, and you will need to simply hold it differently. I thought, she has decided what I am, and she is not going to revise the category without a reason she cannot dismiss. I cannot provide that reason. I can only stay present and let the situation provide it for me. I went inside. I made tea. I sat at the kitchen table until 1 a.m., and then I went to bed because I had a shift at midnight the following evening. The decision I had been sitting with for several weeks was not dramatic. It was very simple. I decided I would attend the graduation. I would sit in the seat I was assigned. I would be present for my brother in the way I had been present for 6 years, without ceremony, without requiring acknowledgement, without making it about anything other than him. I would not ask Patricia Aiken for anything. I would not explain myself. I would watch my brother become a doctor, and I would drive home, and I would go to work the following Sunday night at midnight, and that would be enough. That was the plan. Patricia's comment in the hallway on the morning of May 16th arrived at 8:47 a.m. I had been standing by the East Corridor water fountain, adjusting the strap of my dress, a dark green wrap dress I had bought specifically for this occasion, the first item of clothing I had purchased for myself beyond practical necessity in approximately 14 months. I had gotten up at 5:30 a.m. I had driven 2 hours and 40 minutes. I had my mother's reading glasses in my bag because she sometimes forgets them, and a small package in the outer pocket, a card with a folded letter inside that I had written and rewritten 4 times over 2 weeks, trying to find the right version of something I had never said out loud. Patricia came down the corridor in her cream blazer and found me, and she said what she said, with that smile, and walked past me toward the auditorium. I stood at the fountain. I thought, today is about him. She was right about that. She was right about the fact and wrong about the implication, which was that my presence constituted a risk to the day rather than a reason for it. I was not going to make a scene. I was not going to stand up and announce anything. I had never, in 6 years, made a scene. I had simply shown up and done the next thing and transferred the money and written the letters and driven the 4 hours and sat with him in the difficult October and written the residency letter at 3 a.m. on my shift. I had done all of that without a stage and without an audience, and I was not about to need one now. I found my seat in the 7th row. My mother was already seated, between me and an aunt who had driven in from out of state. Diane sat with her family in the designated family section, 2 rows ahead and to the right. Patricia was beside her, already composed in the particular way of someone who has arranged the day to proceed according to their understanding of it. The ceremony began at 9:15 a.m. There were 112 graduates. The dean spoke. A faculty representative spoke. An award for academic excellence was presented. The hooding proceeded alphabetically, which meant Kofi, seated in the K row, would be in the middle third of the ceremony. I watched each name called. I watched each graduate cross the stage. I thought about the Monday in January 2017 when I had started my first overnight shift and come home at noon and slept until 6 p.m. and woken up and made dinner and thought, this is what the next several years will look like, and I can do this, and I will. Kofi crossed the stage at 10:47 a.m. The dean said his name. He received the hood. He shook hands. He turned to face the auditorium for a moment before walking off the stage, and I watched him search the 7th row for my face, and I watched him find it, and I watched something in his expression do the thing it has done since he was 7 years old, a brightening, a settling, as if he had been looking for something without knowing he was looking and had located it. I thought, there it is. That is the whole of it. Then the dean returned to the podium and said there was one final element of the ceremony. The graduating class had selected a student speaker to offer a brief address. The selection had been made by vote, 3 weeks prior. She said the name. She said, Dr. Kofi Osei. I did not know. I want to be completely clear about this. I did not know he had been selected, and I did not know he had been asked, and I did not know he had prepared anything. Kofi had said nothing to me about a speech. Not in any of the calls in the preceding weeks, not in the text thread we maintained, not in any of the approximately 37 interactions we had had since the vote had apparently taken place. He walked back to the podium. He adjusted the microphone. He looked at his notes, a single index card, which he glanced at once and then set face down on the podium shelf. He looked at the auditorium. He said, "I want to start by saying the first and most important thing, which is that I am not the only person who earned this degree." The auditorium was quiet. He said, "There is a woman in the 7th row who worked 12-hour overnight shifts for 6 years so that I could be standing here. She drove 2 hours and 40 minutes this morning to watch me cross a stage that she built the runway for. She wrote my residency letter at 3 in the morning between shift duties. She co-signed the loan when there was a gap, and she transferred the money when there was a shortage, and she sat with me in October of my 3rd year when I was not sure I could keep going, and she did not say anything particularly wise or philosophical about it. She just stayed." He said, "Her name is Wren, and she is my sister, and if any of you accomplish anything worth standing up here to talk about, I hope you have someone like her in your 7th row." He looked directly at me when he said the last sentence. The auditorium was very quiet for a moment. Then it was not quiet at all. I did not stand. I did not raise my hand or acknowledge myself in any visible way. I sat in my folding chair in the 7th row with my hands in my lap, and I let the room be loud around me, and I looked at my brother at the podium and thought about the kitchen table in 2013 and the rice and stew and Mrs. Yaboa's conference and the thing I had said, "Then we'll figure out how." And I thought, we did. We actually did. My mother was crying next to me. She did not try to stop. She cried in the full, unmanaged way that she almost never allows herself in public, and I put my arm around her, and she leaned into it, and we stayed like that while the auditorium found its way back to silence, and Kofi finished his address, which was about the nature of medicine and service and the obligation that comes with a degree, and which was good, though I admit I heard very little of it. I noticed, in the rows ahead and to the right, that Patricia Aiken was very still. Not applauding, not weeping, simply still, in the way of someone who is processing a recalculation that she did not see coming and that changes, retroactively, several things she believed were fixed. Her daughter Diane, beside her, was applauding with both hands, crying freely, her face lit with the expression of someone who is learning something new about the person she is going to marry and finding that it is better than what she already knew. Patricia did not turn around. She did not look toward the 7th row. She sat with her hands in her lap and her face composed, and she looked at the podium, and she was very, very still. After the ceremony, in the wide corridor outside the auditorium, people moved in the slow, celebratory way of formal occasions winding down, photographs being taken, flowers being presented, families regrouping. I stood with my mother and our aunt, and we waited for Kofi to find us in the crowd, which took 11 minutes because 112 graduates and their families occupy a significant amount of corridor. Those 11 minutes were not quiet. People kept stopping. Strangers who had been seated near the 7th row in the auditorium paused to say something to us. Brief, genuine sentences from people whose names I would never know, a woman who said she had cried through the whole speech, a man who gripped my arm at the elbow and said that's the kind of sister that makes a doctor, an older woman who did not say anything at all but took both my hands in hers for a moment and then walked on. My mother stood very straight through all of it. She had stopped crying and she had found her composure, and she received each person with a dignity that I recognized as the same composure she had brought to the packaging facility at midnight and the licensing examination room and the rehab center for 14 years of overnight shifts. She had always been the most composed person in the room when it mattered. She simply looked different from the outside depending on whether the room understood what it was looking at. At 11:24 a.m., I checked my phone because I was managing the post-ceremony parking logistics and needed to track the time. Kofi appeared through the crowd. He hugged my mother first and for a long time. Then he turned to me. He put his hands on my shoulders. He is taller than me now, has been since he was 19, and he looked at me, and I looked at him, and neither of us said anything for a moment. Then I said, "You didn't tell me." He said, "I knew you'd tell me not to." I thought about that. He was correct. I said, "You were right." He said, "I know." Then he reached into the inside pocket of his graduation robe and took out the letter I had put in his card, the one I had rewritten 4 times, the one I had carried in my bag for 2 weeks, and he held it up. He said, "I found it this morning. I read it in the car." I said, "It was in the card in my bag." He said, "I know. I went through your bag. when you were in the bathroom. I've been going through your bag since I was 7 years old, and I knew where you kept important things. I looked at him for a long moment. I said, "You are a doctor now, and you are still going through my bag." He said, "Always." Diane appeared at his side, and she hugged me with the full body, unself-conscious warmth of someone who has decided you are already family. She said, "I didn't know any of it." He didn't tell me what the speech was going to say. I just knew he had to say something. I said, "He did fine." She said, quietly, "My mother wants to speak with you." I said I knew. I said I would find her. Patricia Aiken was standing near the wide windows at the end of the corridor, holding a small bouquet of flowers that had been intended for Kofi, looking out the parking lot with the expression of someone who has been standing still long enough to look deliberate about it. I walked toward her. She heard me approach and turned. She said, "I owe you an apology." I said, "Yes, you do." She looked at me. She was not used to agreement arriving that quickly or that plainly. She adjusted the flowers in her hands. She said, "I didn't understand the full picture. Diane had told me some things, but I think I had not wanted to understand the full picture." I said, "I know." A pause. She said, "What you did for him is extraordinary." I said, "It is what family does." She heard the way I said it. She was intelligent enough to hear the full weight of the sentence, the part that was about Kofi and the part that was not about her. She nodded once. She said, "I would like the chance to know you better, if you're willing." I thought about 12-hour night shifts and 3 a.m. letters and the rice and stew at 8:30 p.m. and Mrs. Yaboa's conference and the October visit and the folding chair in the 7th row and the corridor water fountain and the smile that had arrived at 8:47 a.m. and already departed. I said, "I'm willing to see what willing looks like in practice." She said that was fair. I believed she meant it, or was beginning to. I drove home that afternoon with my mother in the passenger seat, both of us mostly quiet, the kind of quiet that is full rather than empty. She fell asleep somewhere around the 40-minute mark, her head tilted slightly toward the window, and I drove the remaining 2 hours with the radio low and the windows cracked and thought about nothing in particular, which is its own kind of processing. We stopped at a diner outside the city at 3:30 p.m. and ate eggs and toast and talked about nothing important and everything important, the way you do after a day that has been both of those things at once. My mother said, "He has always known what he has." I said, "Yes." She said, "Your father would not have understood what to do with either of you." I said, "No." She said nothing else about that for a moment, and then she said, "I need a second cup of coffee," and I waved the server over, and that was the end of it, and also it was not the end of anything, but we are both efficient with the things that do not need to be reopened. I was back in my apartment by 6:15 p.m. I changed out of the green dress and hung it on the good hanger. I put the kettle on. I sat at the kitchen table with my tea, and I looked at the window and I thought about beginnings and about 6 years, and about what it means when someone takes the trouble to say, in a room full of 112 people, that a thing was real and a person did it, and it mattered. I have spent a long time being the person who does the work that does not appear in the program. I have been comfortable with that more or less because the alternative, waiting to be acknowledged before doing the work, had never made sense to me as an operating principle. You do what is needed because it is needed. You do not wait for a stage. You trust that the work is real even when no room is watching it. What I had not expected was that someone would build me a stage anyway, without asking, without warning, from the inside of his own graduation speech, on a day that was supposed to be entirely about him. That is the thing about people who love you correctly. They find the stage for you when you have stopped looking for it. They say the thing you would never have said for yourself, in the room where it lands the hardest. Real love is not the grand gesture on the good days. It is the October visit. It is the 3 a.m. letter. It is the 7-year-old going through your bag because he always knew where you kept the important things, and 22 years later using that knowledge to find the letter before you could decide it was too much and put it away. Before you go, I want to say one practical thing. If you are supporting someone's education, document everything. Not because you will need it in a legal dispute, because someday in a hallway or at a kitchen table or in a folding chair in a 7th row, you will want to know precisely what was real and what it cost and what it built. Numbers make things real. Keep the transfer receipts. They are the shape of the love made legible. So, I want to ask you something before this story ends. If you had been in Wren's place, if a woman had told you in a corridor, with a smile, not to make a graduation about your own sacrifices, would you have said something to her in that moment, let her see exactly who she was speaking to? Or would you have done what Wren did? Nodded, found your seat, and trusted that the truth had its own way of arriving, in its own time, on its own terms, from the podium of the person you had given everything to build? My team and I work hard to create stories that carry something real. Everything here is fictional, created for entertainment, for reflection, and for the belief that invisible labor deserves eventually to be named, loudly, specifically, and in the right room.